Alright, I'm Paul Sailors. I'm going to just pull up a few books that might help you all out, most of which we sell in our book and gift shop. This is pretty much our Bible when it comes to talking about stylistic elements, architecture, exterior wise. Interior-wise, the elements of style, I'm not sure if it's still in print, but it's a great resource for interiors as well as exteriors across the board, not just in the United States. Specific to Charleston interiors, the Chamberlain book, Charleston Interiors, is also a great book we sell in our book and gift shop. And the Charleston Interior by Tom Savage and photographed by Jane Isley, we also sell in our shop. What I'm going to do today is go over the architecture of the 5 types of architecture that we're going to feature on our architectural overview tours. We have 4 weeks of tours, and each week we have one Thursday evening that is dedicated to an overview of architecture in Charleston. I'll go over the 5 styles of architecture, and then I'm going to go through each house, the exterior, just to explain a little bit about what we would like to convey to the tour goer this year. We've had a great response to our changes with the tours. The themes have worked out well. People are really excited about it, and we try to do as much training as possible. And your folders that you'll receive later will be more than enough information than you want to know, really. You'll have all the house histories for every house on tour, not just the one that you signed up for. So when you're talking about your house that you're in, you can talk about how it relates to other themes during our tour season and other types of architecture on tour. So I'll just get started. The 4 tours are going to be Thursday evenings, like I said, October 3rd, 10th, 17th, and 24th, and they're going to be evening tours from 6 to 9 p.m. These are the only evening tours that we have during our fall tours this year. The 5 different types of architecture that we're going to cover were hand-chosen for each tour. Each tour has 5 to 6 properties on tour. We'll start with Georgian, which is the earliest in Charleston. Federal and Adam, on to Classical Revival, Italianate, and then Queen Anne. The thing about Charleston houses, we had a huge fire in 1740, so early Georgian houses are not going to be prevalent on tours, obviously, because Georgian period was 1700 to roughly 1780. Then you come into Federal, which is 1780, roughly 1820. Go into Greek Revival and Classical Revival, onto Italianate and Queen Anne with the Victorian period. If you have taken the sort of online classes, the PowerPoints that you will find on our website, these slides are drawn straight from those PowerPoints, so I'm not going to dwell on every single element from the Georgian, Federal, Italianate period. If you'd like to study more, you can print them. I can print them for you. Just shoot me an email, and it's psailors@preservationsociety.org, and I'd be happy to print the slides for you to have a hard copy to study with. This first, we'll start with Georgian. Georgian period, this of course is the Miles Bruton house. It is not on tour, but just some Georgian characteristics. The George is very symmetrical, often has a bell force along the 2nd story. Handsome door surrounds. The interiors, we talk a lot about the exteriors of these homes, but we'll actually go in the interior, obviously. These books, the interior books, will really help you with the lingo of what to talk about, what a dado is. The Georgian homes and buildings were paneled mostly, and then during the Federal period, they were only paneled up to what the dado is, which is basically, this is a dado. You have your cornice, your dado, and then your shoe molding. So into Federal The rooms would be wallpapered, you'd see more decoration on the ceiling. Georgian is just heavy paneling. When you think of Georgian, just think of heavy moldings above the windows, broken pediments. And the muntins in Georgian houses and buildings are these pieces of wood. They're usually a little bit wider than in the Federal period. You find it's a little bit more delicate. The muntins get thinner, the columns get thinner. Federal is just a lot more delicate, light, airy. The mantles are a little bit more whimsical with urns and swags and more classical type applications to the mantles. And again, these interior books, I've made some copies in the folders that you'll get. We'll point out some details in the specific houses on our tour. So the classic kind of Adam Federal house in Charleston is the Manigo House on Meeting Street. You see the columns are a little bit thinner, they're further apart. The arch is used more, it has elliptical rooms. The Adam brothers influenced, they were English, they influenced the Federal period here and here. The rooms are a lot more open, it's not as heavy as the Georgian. When you walk into a Federal room, you kind of take a deep breath and it's a little bit more ornate, detail-wise. This is an example, not in Charleston, but it's just a great example of a Georgian interior. You see all the wood paneling, the pediments over the doors, the ears here around the doors, the mantle. Drayton Hall is a great example of the Georgian Palladian style. Their ballroom paneling everywhere. This is a black and white picture of a more Federal room. You see the paneling stops here, and then there's decorative wallpaper. The mantles are a little more ornate with paneling there. The classical revival style, which is, you look at classical revival, you look at a lot of churches, you look at a lot of the Customs House over on East Bay Street. You think simple columns, a pediment, just harkening back to the classical period just before the Greek revival came in to play. The Greek, we have one fine example on Limehouse Street of Greek revival. It's 9 Limehouse Street, and you'll find a lot of these details which are taken straight from the McAllister book there. You'll find the Greek key design, Anthemian leaves, honeysuckle leaves, simple low pitched roofs or flat roofs in the Greek revival style, roughly starting about 1830, 1840 on through 1860 or so. This is the Italianate style. This is a commercial building. Again, not really on tour, but the finest example that we have of Italianate architecture is 8 Liberty Street, and I have a slide of that I'll show you coming up. But this more commercial Italianate style, a low pitched roof, elaborate window hoods applied to residential buildings and commercial buildings, triple hung double windows, often with a Roman arch. And then we have Queen Anne style, which 2 Meeting Street Inn is one example of the Queen Anne style down on the corner of South Battery and Meeting Street. The second example that we have on tour is 60 Meeting Street, which was actually a colonial era house. It's on the corner of Trad and Meeting. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it at Halloween time when it's decorated with skeletons and goblins and all sorts of stuff hanging off balconies. Turrets you'll find on Queen Anne, the Satilli House over at College of Charleston's campus, another classic example of the Queen Anne style. I'm just going to dive right in just to remind you the 4 tours, 3rd, 10th, 17th, and 24th. We have 3 properties that are on all 4 of these tours, so I'm going to go through those first, and then we have some that overlap with two tours. Will make more sense in just a moment. The first property, 95 Broad Street. This is an example of our Georgian interiors. It doesn't really have Georgian exterior other than the 9/9 windows with the thick muntins, and it's very symmetrical. This house you'll find in your packets when you receive them. They're upstairs printing right now still, so just bear with us through the end of this lecture. But this actually had a piazza at one point. This back portion was added on. You can tell, you see these earthquake bolts here, and you see them across the front. There would have been an original door here to access the residential portion of the building. This is a great example of a commercial building. This is 1770. Much of what was built on East Bay Street, this end of Queen Street, State Street, Elliott Street, Beaton's Alley. You have your commercial space on the front of the building on the first floor. And so you have an office area here. And then the rest of the building would predominantly be residential. So the residential access would be on the side, and then you have your commercial access in the front there. When you go inside this building, they'll probably have both doors open, but the front room is here. They've created a hall down this door here. So the stair was moved actually, I think in the late 1800s, to the side of the building and make it kind of a side hall house. When the owner in the 80s purchased it, after Hugo, there was so much damage from Hugo, she put the stairs back where they originally were. Did not put the door back, but created it as her residence above and her shop on the ground floor. Today it's Luxury Simplified Group, a real estate, kind of all-inclusive real estate company that is new to Charleston, and they're happy to have it open. In the packet, you will find great detailed information about the Georgian wood paneling. The finest probably on the second floor drawing room right here. And you'll see this heavy relief Georgian paneling that's been written up in the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts in the 80s. Luxury Simplified Group has made a few changes in the building. They use it as office space, but the changes that they've made are reversible, and that's what we try to do with preservation. When you do make changes, you try to make sure it's reversible, so it can go back to what its original use was. So not so much Georgian on the exterior, but when you're inside and you're leading your group through, you can explain a little bit of detail about the heavy Georgian paneling and some of the Georgian applications on the exterior of this building. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with 28 Lambolt Street. This is also the Georgian House, 1777. This was a double tenement. A tenement was rental property, basically. This one is, I think, 4 Labrie Street, and this is 28 Lambolt Street. They share a common wall, and you have interior chimneys within this kind of square house that was built at once, but shared by 2 separate families or tenants. The interior of this house, the front room, has some Georgian paneling. This is kind of a mixture of Georgian and Federal. So this is kind of the transition from Georgian to Federal, 1777. Federal kind of starts 1780, so it's kind of on the cusp of Federal. You have these hoods over the windows, more Federal style over these windows. The Georgian aspect comes in the paneling. It comes in the 2 floors here, and then a shorter, smaller 3rd floor is a Palladian design that you'll find in Palladio's books on architecture. He did the 3rd story with kind of a more square window on the 3rd floor, and then the garret attic story. So this is 3.5 on a raised basement. He'll talk about the paneling in each room, the transition from Georgian to Federal. It's interesting in Charleston, there are a lot of transitional buildings, and of course over time people applied different elements to their buildings. So a lot of buildings aren't purely Georgian, purely federal, purely Italianate, but we do have some examples. The Miles Bruton House is purely Georgian. The Manigo House is purely federal or Adams. 8 LaGree Street, which we're fortunate to have on tour, is purely Italianate. So there are some fine examples, but houses like these are kind of a transition. It was a rental property, so it's not high style, but there's still some elements of the time when it was built.
Excuse me, tenement means it's rental property, so there could be a house for rent or an apartment for rent?
Not currently.
No, but I mean, that's,
Still.
I understand modern term, but I would want to make sure that I had that tenement word correctly done. So it's rental property, whether it's a whole house or part of a house.
A tenement?
Yes, in Charleston terms.
Yes, the derivation of it is an English term, and that's where it came about. But it's Mr. Kincaid who built this one building that is two separate residences was originally a tenement building. There's a short explanation of how the piazza came about, and if you get Gene Waddell's book, he goes into great detail about how the piazza came about and was later added to early buildings. And 8 LaGree is the third property that is on all 4 tours. It is a not super high style Italianate, but it's a grand style. It's a huge house. It's just, the rooms are just massive. And how many people have been in 8 LaGree? It holds the record on our tours. I think it's been on tour for 28 years now. Probably. So, but just a great house. The Cleveland Kinloch UG house. The Zips, they usually have the first floor here open and part of the garden. The Italianate style, classic Italianate, usually has a tower involved somewhere in the building. The old Roper Hospital over on Queen and Logan Street, which used to be there, had towers. Coining, which are these elements applied to the corners of the building. Another Italianate feature, the kind of Italian door with the arches and the heavy cornice and wider eaves along the roof line there, and just a very wide piazza with French doors opening out onto the piazza. This is a classic Charleston side hall house. You walk in and the stairs are along the property line side of the building and creates a hallway. So then you have these rooms. There are 3 rooms all in a row, and you have these grand doors that you can open up and create more airflow, more living space, more party space, and open the doors and allow some cross ventilation from that grand piazza. And being up on a raised basement, the 8 LaGree, 1857. Italianate starts roughly the same time Gothic does in Charleston, 1840 through 1860. And the interiors of 8 LaGree are just as grand as the exteriors. They've done a great job with restoring some of their gas lighting, original gas lighting that was still in the house when it was bought back in the 80s, I believe. I walked through it with the owner, and there'll probably be a stench of gas in the house at the time, so just, tell your tour goers everything's fine. It's original gas chandeliers, and there's some sconces on the walls, which I'm sure he'll light. That was his most recent project, and he's very proud of it. So, I think he might be a docent on the tour as well. So those 3, 95 Broad, 28 Lambeau, 8 LaGree are going to be on all 4 tours. The other 2 or 3 houses will change a little bit, and I'll go into those now. Week 1, October 3rd, you have those 3, and then we have 114 Broad, 2 Meeting, 89 East Bay. 114 Broad is the Bishop's House, just around the corner here. That was originally Colonel Thomas Pinckney's house, Thomas Pinckney Jr.'s house, built 1790. The earthquake of 1886, the third story pediment fell off. It was brick, and they built it back in that kind of weatherboard there with an arched window that kind of harkens back to the classical revival style. And this front portico is very classical revival. Simple 4 columns, triple hung windows on each floor, and the interiors, some of which I think they're in the stairwell, there might be some barrel vaulting and just very thick moldings. In the Bishop's House, they've been great. Also been on tour for a number of years. We're trying to interpret these houses a little bit differently this year. We want to give a more well-rounded experience for our tour goer. We want to tell them who lived there historically. We want to talk about the architecture, and we want to talk about how the architecture fits into these themes throughout all of the tours. They can kind of see the transition from house to house and how the style of architecture changed in Charleston and changed the way that the city was basically laid out. Queen Anne, 2 Meeting Street, the Carrington Carr House. On this property, there was a house there prior to the earthquake of 1886. The earthquake took the house, pretty much took the house down completely, and then by 1890, you find your Queen Anne being applied to a lot of houses on South Battery right there. I know 24 and 26 South Battery, you can mention that 24 and 26 kind of got a facelift in the 1890s, and in the interior there's still some 1770s paneling in those houses when the Queen Anne style came into being. The Italianate Queen Anne applications of some rounded windows and that sort of thing were applied to these houses. The 89 East Bay is a great example of commercial use as 95 Broad, commercial on the first floor and residential on the second and third floors. Usually this whole house is open, all 3.5 floors, and it can be kind of tiresome climbing up and down the stairs, but it's a great house. It's got a great view of the water from the third story there. And the property used to extend all the way back to Meetings Alley between Elliott Street and Trad Street. So with this house, you can talk about more commercial use on the bottom floors and Rainbow Row. Everybody loves to hear about Rainbow Row. Week 2, we have our 3 staples here, and then we have 60 Meeting Street, 9 East Battery, 2 Radisson. This is another example of a colonial building that kind of got a facelift in the 1890s. This is one, I have the address wrong there, I'm sorry. This is 60 Meeting Street, the William Ellis house, built 1771, then altered 1893. You can see these bays were added, this round Queen Anne window, and then a grand turret, and the 4th floor was added as well. Has some Italianate details, the paired brackets along the cornice there, and some of the window hoods around all the windows, and of course the bay windows.
Was it damaged in 1886, and that was part of the motivation for doing the...
Yes, ma'am. Most of the houses that were redone in the Queen Anne style were damaged in the earthquake of 1886. This too has kind of a twin on Trad Street. It's pretty much what it used to look like. It's another example, like 28 Lambeau, that they were built as one building. Center fireplaces that were shared, center chimneys that were shared. And then if you stand on Trad and look north, you can compare the two quite nicely.
Didn't this house start out as a single house?
Well, it, like, sort of. But it does have a classic single house design, center stair,
Yeah.
2 rooms on each floor. And we all love the Roper House 9 East Battery. It's on the second week tour, and it is Greek Revival in style. And I tied Greek Revival and Classical Revival in. They kind of transition from one to the other, but this is really Greek Revival with Greek Revival interiors, furniture, moldings, everything. It's just Duncan Fife furniture. Classic Charleston side hall, the side stair being there on the right, and I believe just the 2 rooms on the main story there are going to be open. In addition, I believe put on the back, and then again in 1900, most recently brought back the rounded window there. In the, I guess 1900, they kind of put in a more Queen Anne looking geometric window. You'll see some pictures in your packets of that. Just tell the tour folks anything you want to tell them that's true, and that you find in your packet, because I feel like the studies that we've done over the past 5 years with the College of Charleston has really given us an idea that people want to know a lot more than what we've given them in the past, and they want to know about architecture, they want to know about preservation, and they want to know who lived in these houses, not just currently, but in the past too. So we try to provide as much information as possible in these packets for you.
Was the sunroom and the other addition?
It was an addition, and that you can see the 2/2 windows rather than the 9/9 windows. It's just a quick, easy way to tell that it was an addition. It's a huge property. Looks smaller in this picture than it is. Week 3, we have our 3 here. Staples, 9 Limehouse, and 60 Meeting Street again. So 9 Limehouse, this is the classic Greek Revival style, another side hall house. The Kinloch House. This property is a large property, and it was built Limehouse Street. Basically, the rear of their property was the Ashley River, and the boathouse that used to be, that was built with the house, is still in the back corner of the property. So just beyond this property was marsh, and they had a boathouse. The boathouse is still there. There's a long fence that runs along the garden here. This has great, you can see the urns along the top here, another classical revival, Greek Revival style. Great elements inside and out to point to Greek Revival and classical revival style in this house. And we have 60 Meeting Street, William Ellis house again. Week 4, 114 Broad is on again, and then 9 Limehouse again. So we try to get as many houses, as many homeowners who would let us have their house 4 weeks in a row, from 6 to 9 p.m. So we try to make it easier on you all to not have to regurgitate so much information on so many different properties. So 114 Broad again, and 9 Limehouse again. Does anybody have any questions about the tours, the logistics of the tours, or style?
Are people already going to have an overview of the architecture, the exterior before you take them through the house, or does the person being the storyteller also talk about the exterior before you go in?
The greeter at the door, the person that will remain at the door, will kind of give an overview of the exterior, but you're welcome to talk about the exterior in the house too. We're not telling you to talk about what's in this room, and then what's in this room, and then what's in that room, and then talk about Granny's teacup anymore. It's going to be, you kind of come up with your own story with the information that we've given you. We're having a lot of faith here. And then you kind of tell the person as if it was your own home, kind of, and just tell them about And you don't have to say the same thing every time. You can tell a different story every time. So it's really up to you what you tell them. And there's plenty of information that's hopefully will be in your hands shortly.
If there are only two of you to a building, a home,
There will be 3 people giving tours simultaneously and 1 person at the door.
we have 2 people on, the and me are doing the 2, we only have 2 people at the houses. Will there be an additional person, so we don't need to worry about that?
So there will be 3 storytellers
I hear that.
and then 1 person at the door.
Okay, but on our packets,
Mm-hmm.
we've noticed that on some of our houses on tour, there's the greeter and the storyteller. The additional ones will come to us?
Yeah, we just haven't had people sign up.
Oh, okay.
We're still recruiting people.
Okay,
So
we're-
tell your friends.
There was a little panic,
Yeah.
and it's not panic, but panic. About the 2 of us trying to do a
Oh, right.
huge house. I mean, we were trying to decide how far in I could go without making.
Right, we're basically designing it around a 10 to 15 minute walk as you walk through the house. And then you'll circle back around,
Yeah,
take
that,
another
I've
route.
heard that. I just
So-
was panicking with the names of it. I can believe you.
Okay.
I can't believe you. The first grade figure is gonna come. We're gonna have it.
Wouldn't
We
be
can
the
do it,
first
but we'd
time.
rather not do it, yes. And it is a first grade figure. 20 years.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments? Just the 4 tours again and dates. And the 6 to 9 p.m. The days will start getting shorter, so we're gonna try to do the candlelight thing. One night we've kind of been decreasing our candlelight tours. A lot of homeowners prefer the candlelight tours, the evening tours.
Will there be someone bringing this, will there be candles and flag and everything as before, and
Oh,
who's
yeah.
responsible to set it up?
We are staff.
Oh, you're doing it,
Mhm.
okay.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
You're taking it. Oh, that helps, yeah.
So we'll just expect you all about an hour before the tour, around 5 o'clock, and then welcome to leave around 9. I am going to go check on the status of the packets, and that's it. I'm gonna make this available. There's really not much content other than what I pulled from the PowerPoints that are already online. But I'm gonna put this up online as well, so you can see the houses, pictures of the houses. And if you would like to do any more research on the property that you've been given, you're welcome to, and can make your contribution to the society, and we'll just stick it in that property file. We do have, from the city directories, we've done some research on who's lived there roughly since the late 1860s in most of these properties, and we can make that available to y'all. Because it's always interesting to see who's lived in the properties over the time, what they did, where they worked, and that sort of thing. So